A recent video on China's Douyin platform opens with the dramatic title, Poland Goes Crazy, suddenly blocks the China-European railway, the video explains.
突发消息，波兰突然宣布
Poland suddenly announced that, starting on September 11, it would fully close all border crossings with Belarus. This shutdown covers roads, railways, and pedestrian crossings, which has directly trapped hundreds of China-Europe trains in Belarus. Thousands of businesses, unable to wait, were forced to switch to sea transport, causing shipping costs to rise by 30% instantly. It's important to know that there are 5 main routes for China-Europe trains, and 3 of them pass through Poland on their way to Europe. Nearly 90% of these trains need to transit through Poland, so with this blockade, the supply chains for businesses have been abruptly cut off.
Another influencer in the video remarked, I heard that Poland closed its borders crossings, and now these containers are being sent back. Has the China-Europe relationship been affected? On September 12th, Belarus and Russia began joint military exercises, with Poland responding by closing its borders. This move blocked an important land route for Chinese goods entering Europe, leaving over 300 China-Europe trains stranded in Belarus. According to media reports, on September 15th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had a 3-hour meeting with Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, hoping to reopen the borders. However, Poland refused. Beijing urged relevant countries to take action and restore normal operations for the China-Europe trains. Bloomberg reported that Poland's Foreign Minister, Sikorski, had previously said that during his meeting with Wang Yi on the 15th, he would urge China to pressure Russia to stop hybrid actions at the Polish eastern border. Sikorski insisted that peace must be maintained between 2 neighboring countries before the border could be fully reopened. On September 12th, Belarus and Russia started the Zapad 2025 joint military exercises. Polish Prime Minister Tusk stated that a key objective of this exercise was the Suwalki Gap, and should a full-scale war break out, Russia would attempt to take control of this region. In response, Poland announced the closure of its border with Belarus. Following an incident involving Russian drones entering Polish airspace, Poland decided to extend the border closure. 3 cross-border railway freight lines, 1 vehicle crossing, and 1 truck crossing were all blocked, halting all railway transport between China and Europe. As a result, more than 300 China-Europe trains were stuck in Belarus. Platforms like Temu and Shein delivering goods to Europe could face delivery delays, particularly for time-sensitive items. Marek Rozeski, CEO of the logistic company Last Mile Experts, said in a media interview that if the route is blocked, some parcels will be forced to switch to sea freight, and up to 30% may need to be air freighted. He added that this would undoubtedly impact cost and operational quality. The affected German freight company, Deutsche Bahn, stated in a statement that the suspension of transport would disrupt operators' operations, which were already in a difficult position. However, they expressed full understanding and support for the government's decision given Poland's national interest. The China-Europe Railway is a vital land transport route for goods between China and Europe, passing through Russia and Belarus to reach Poland and then distributing to Western European countries. According to CNES report, China's trade with the EU amounts to 25 billion euros annually. The blockage of this important land route has severely impacted China's trade with Europe. Polish television station TVP reported that according to transportation market analysis firm Apply, China-EU rail freight volume grew by 10.6% in 2024. The value of rail freight has also significantly increased to 25 billion euros, up 85% compared to 2023. Rail transport now accounts for 3.7% of the total annual trade between China and Europe, up from 2.1% last year. Reports indicate that Poland's government stated that the border closure were primarily for defense and security reasons. Following the recent Russian drone intrusion, Poland and NATO countries have strengthened their defense deployment in Eastern Europe. Poland emphasized that even after the Russian-Belarus Zapad 2025 joint military exercise, it would not lift the border blockade with Belarus. A Chinese independent media source reports that China has 2 alternative land routes to Europe. One is the southern route, which goes through the China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan Railway, Turkmenistan, Iran, Turkey, and into Europe. The other route passes through the China, Kazakhstan, Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Zangezur corridor, then Turkey, and onto Europe. However, neither of these routes is expected to be feasible in the short term. The source noted that since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war, international trade has shown characteristics of fragmentation and regionalization, and supply chains are constantly being restructured. The Kremlin is not interested in acting as the hub between the EU and China. As the Eurasian Horizontal Axis strategy, EU, Russia, China has not helped Russia rise, but rather pushed it towards marginalization. So who does the China-Europe train route matter most to? Clearly, it matters most to the Chinese government. Amidst the strong tariff pressures from the Trump administration, China has made Europe its most important outlet for excess production capacity. Poland's border blockade, citing the Russia-Belarus military exercises, directly cut off the land trade between China and Europe. Its strong stance is eye-catching, and it's rare for Poland to openly reject China's foreign minister's plea, even stating that the blockade will remain even after the military exercises. This is almost like a direct declaration of opposition to China. It also highlights the subtle differences in how Poland, as the front line facing the Russian threat, views the China issue compared to other EU countries. In response to Poland's tough stance, China has clearly become anxious, revealing its typical pattern of coercion and bribery towards the Polish government. On September 21st, Chinese state-backed media outlet NetEase published an article discussing Poland's refusal to allow China-Europe trains to pass. The report noted, China has made it clear that it is willing to promote the continued development of China-Poland relations, increase strategic mutual trust, and strengthen economic and trade cooperation. These promises suggest that Poland may gain more opportunities for economic cooperation in China's development process, notably Poland as a key node for China-Europe trains entering Europe. Its attitude directly affects the smooth flow of the China-Europe land trade channel. Clearly, terms like economic cooperation opportunities are empty and false promises from China. The final sentence, its attitude directly affects the smooth flow of the China-Europe land trade channel, is just another form of China's usual threat. However, the article disappointingly states that despite China's goodwill, Poland still refuses to open the border and claims that Poland is under the influence of external forces. The article goes on to explain that in response to Poland's unilateral decision, China quickly reacted. On September 19th, Chinese Foreign Minister spokesperson Ling Jian stated that China, in collaboration with Russia, would push for the development and construction of the Northern Sea Route, welcoming cooperation from other surrounding countries to jointly promote peaceful development and resource utilization in the Arctic region. The Northern Sea Route, which runs along Russia's northern coastline through the Arctic Ocean, is often promoted by China as the Polar Silk Road. China claims that with global warming, the navigability of the route will improve year by year, enhancing its strategic value. Once fully operational, it would provide the shortest sea route connecting East Asia and Europe, drastically reducing transport time and cost. For China, this means goods can be shipped directly to Western and Northern Europe by sea without relying heavily on the China-Europe railway or traditional routes through the Strait of Malacca. However, this vision, or even a form of pressure, has not swayed Poland. The China-Europe railway, which is vital to China, remains firmly blocked by Poland. From Poland's perspective, allowing the China-Europe railway to pass might seem simple, just stop supporting Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and trade can resume. Yet, this reasonable request is too high of a price for China to pay, and it's clear that President Trump has already seen this. On September 19th, after concluding his official visit to the UK, Trump spoke to Fox News. He commented that he had helped resolve many conflicts and, based on his relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, had initially thought the Russian-Ukraine war would be the easiest to resolve, only to find it the most difficult. Trump believes that China is Russia's largest oil buyer, which gives it significant influence over Russia. So if European countries impose sanctions or tariffs on China, the Russian-Ukraine war might end. Trump said to Fox News, if they did sanctions, as an example, or tariffs, or whatever you want to call it, if they did that on China, I think the war would maybe end. Trump expressed frustrations with some EU or NATO countries still buying Russian oil. The US has taken a hard stance against India, another major buyer of Russian oil, by imposing high tariffs. Trump argued that if oil prices fall or Russia stops selling oil, Russia would have no choice but to reach a resolution. He also said, "It is unacceptable for Europe to buy oil from Russia and for me to be upset that China is buying oil from Russia." Analysts said Trump's comments hit the mark. It's hard to understand why the EU, which claims to oppose Russia, continues buying Russian energy. This reflects a selfish short-term logic where European politicians prioritize domestic votes, fearing energy prices hikes if they stop buying Russian energy, which could threaten their political power. Fortunately, under Trump's constant pressure, the EU finally responded. On September 19th, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, announced that the EU would hold traders, petrochemical companies, and refineries from third countries, including China, accountable for violating the price cap, set as $47.6 per barrel on Russian oil. According to the Wall Street Journal, this move is part of a broader effort by the EU to signal to President Trump that it is increasing economic pressure on Russia and its supporters. The report added that the EU will implement new banking sanctions, blacklist more companies aiding the Russian military, and accelerate its plan to stop purchasing Russian liquefied natural gas. These measures need approval from all 27 member states, but internal EU divisions such as Hungary's pro-Russia stance make unanimous approval difficult. It's believed that this proposal is a compromise to Trump's more severe suggestion. Trump has told European officials that he wanted to impose tariffs of up to 100% on China to retaliate for its support to Russia, but the EU had long rejected using tariffs as leverage, as Trump did. The EU plans to blacklist another 118 ships suspected of transporting Russian oil and ban transactions with Russian oil giants like Rosneft and Gazprom-Neft. It will also impose sanctions on more Russian banks and foreign banks that finance Russian companies. The report notes that if this new sanction plan is approved, the EU will move closer to implementing secondary sanctions, a long-standing US strategy that the EU has historically opposed. EU sanctions typically apply only to individuals and companies within the EU and the target country. The European Union has announced it will ban the purchase of liquefied natural gas by the end of 2026, 1 year earlier than originally planned. The EU stated that it purchased nearly $27 billion in Russian energy exports last year, a sharp drop from the approximately $169 billion in 2022. Simone Tagliapietra, a senior researcher at the Brussels-based think tank Bruegel, believes that Trump's pressure on Europe to move faster on banning Russian energy imports seems to have worked. Lindsey Graham, a US senator and Trump's ally, has been pushing a bipartisan sanctions bill in the Senate. He wrote on X, "The European Union's decision to sanction oil infrastructure in China is a significant step in the right direction. And if China chooses to call Putin tomorrow and said it's time to end the war, it would end." The report points out that Russia's ability to export oil and gas is already limited. Oil and gas typically account for a third of the country's budget revenue, worsening Russia's already slowing economy. Analysts note that Poland's decision to cut off the China-Europe railway has severed an important trade route between China and Europe, which could play a key role in the EU's eventual agreement with President Trump to impose sanctions on China. Poland's actions have not only demonstrated its strategic importance in guarding Europe's gates, but also sent a clear message that China is seen as a key player behind the Russia-Ukraine war. It's clear that under Trump's strong pressure and Poland's firm stance, the EU has finally faced up to both Russia and its supporter, China. Stan, a popular influencer known as the best Chinese speaker in Poland, recently pointed out that Poland played a crucial role in the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. In solidarity movement led by the Polish worker dismantled Poland's communist regime in 1989, paving the way for the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. He explained this August, the Czech Republic, which also freed itself from communist rule, added a clause to its criminal law amendment explicitly banning communist propaganda and equating communism with Nazism. However, as early as 1997, Poland's constitutional court ruled that communist activities were unconstitutional and classified both fascism and communism as illegal. In 2016, Poland passed the anti-communism law, which banned communist propaganda and other authoritarian regimes. Stan believes Poland has a clear understanding of the dangers of communism, as countries like Poland, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic suffered greatly under Soviet communist rule. This has made Poland particularly cautious about China's communist regime. He also emphasized that US presidents, including Trump, have always valued Poland, and Trump's support for Poland never wavered. During a recent visit to Washington, Poland's new president received a commitment from Trump that the US would provide military support if Poland needed it. Stan sees Trump as viewing Poland as America's most reliable ally in Europe, from his criticism of NATO countries' defense spending to praising Poland's strategic position. Trump has shown that US-Poland relations are strong. He said, from Reagan, Clinton, George W. Bush, Obama to Biden, both US political parties have always pledged support to Poland, as both countries share similar values and have deep historical ties. On the issue of Taiwan, Stan bluntly stated that China's strategy of force, buying, and deception against Taiwan has never stopped, from military aircraft circling Taiwan, buying influencers and businessmen, to engaging in cognitive warfare. He believes Taiwan must adopt a comprehensive defense strategy to effectively counter the threats. Militarily, Taiwan should become a porcupine, increasing defense spending to make China pay a price. Economically, Taiwan should strengthen ties with democratic nations to avoid being bought. In terms of information, Taiwan must be wary of cognitive warfare and block platforms like TikTok when necessary to prevent young people from being mentally influenced. Analysts suggest that this Polish influencer largely represents the Polish government's attitude towards China. Taiwan's situation shares similarities with Poland's, and the strong alignment of values and anti-communist stance between Poland and the US makes Poland a natural leader in Europe's efforts to combat China. Poland's move to cut off land trade between China and Europe has not only had economic consequences, but has also pointed the entire continent in the right direction. Europe now has no turning back and must move forward with Poland and the US in their efforts to counter China.